name is Shikha Pathak. I'm the Manager Awareness and Skill Building at SciSec. A very warm welcome to today's webinar. This webinar is a part of SciSec's weekly series titled Samgacchadhwam, May We All Progress Together. The objective is to cover cybersecurity topics and provide conceptual overview to various aspects of security. Let's talk about some ground rules first. All attendees of the webinar will be on mute by default. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. In case you have any questions, please type on the chat window and the speakers will respond later. We are also going to record the webinar and the recording will be uploaded on SciSec's YouTube channel. So you can always refer back to the video later. This is the 17th webinar of this series, and the topic today is holistic endpoint security. We have partnered with McAfee for this webinar. We have 2 more webinars by McAfee, and we'll be sharing the registration link of the next week's webinar shortly. I'm sure that you will find these series of webinar very useful. I hope that these webinars will kindle your interest in the field of security. As usual, we will have an assessment after the webinar, and it will be open for 60 minutes. The questions which will be there in the assessment will be covered in this webinar. So listen carefully. Those who get more than 16 marks, correct answers, will be given a certificate of achievement. For those who are unable to take the assessment, they will be provided with a certificate of participation. At the end of this assessment, you will also be asked to provide a feedback. So please provide your genuine feedback. It really helps us. And be rest assured, it will not have any bearing on the assessment. Please make sure, this is for all the participants, to provide your details clearly while taking the assessment, because a certificate will be generated based on the details that you provide us. The link of the assessment will be shared at the end of this webinar in the Q&A section. Please note that this assessment will be available only to those who have participated in the webinar. Now, let me take this opportunity to introduce the speakers for today's webinar on holistic endpoint security. We have experts from the McAfee team who will be speaking in today's webinar. Our first speaker is Mr. Rama Moruganti. Rama is the Vice President of Engineering at McAfee India. He is the site head for entrepreneur products based out of India. He is a thought leader with a wealth of knowledge gathered over 29 years of rich work experience. We welcome you, sir. Next, we have Mr. Srinidhi Krishnan. He is the Director of Engineering at McAfee India Center. He manages enterprise endpoint security products. He has over 23 years of experience with core security domain exposure in endpoint, security as a service, cloud, and anti-malware research technologies. Our third speaker is Mr. Mahesh Manepa. He is the Director of Engineering, managing risk and compliance products of McAfee. He has over 20 years of industry experience in the field of security, payments, mobile, cloud services, and application development. I'm sure all our participants will gain a lot from the rich knowledge and expertise of all our speakers today. I will now hand over to Rama for the next part of this presentation. Over to you, Rama.
Thank you, Shikha.
So, before that, let me just start presenting the slides. I'll just take control and just I'll be the presenter. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes, Srinidhi. If you can go into presentation.
Okay.
Thank
Yes,
you.
please.
Sure. Perfect. Over to you, Rama.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot for this opportunity to be in front of you. Today, I have Srinidhi and Mahesh who would help me, uncover what we call as the holistic endpoint security. Essentially, this is about looking at security from multiple angles before we start looking at various facets of how we face attacks and what are the kinds of attacks we face. I would also love to kind of take you through a quick agenda of what we have in store for you, and then walk you also through the evolution of security as we see it at McAfee. The next slide, please.
Sure.
So what we would essentially talk about today is the landscape evolution, then the attack surface. Attack surface essentially is all the various places from where one faces attack. And that's essentially would be also our surface of protection too. And endpoint, has its, detractors and supporters, but it still essentially is a cornerstone of all of our security. We will look at the evolution of endpoint also in a brief interlude. And then the outcomes of what we look at as enterprise security. Apart from that, we will look at a few capabilities that we have across various different products. And of course, we would also walk you through the endpoint detection and response, which is essentially the emerging field of the next-gen security. Next slide, please. So, I mean, if we step back and look at how threats have evolved, if there are people who are old enough or who can look back enough to see what happened, there was a time when essentially it was all about viruses. Then we kind of heard about worms, and then at some point of time, all these threats kind of started penetrating into web. If you actually see, this overlaps with the evolution of IT itself and even the penetration of various devices. When things were very confined to individual laptops, that's when you saw all those initial virus era. But as social networking caught on, I mean, the medium of how the threat started, penetrating, they've changed. And today, essentially, in the last 4 to 5 years, 6 years, maybe, if you can stretch it about 10 years, you would see once we have the Facebook, once we have WhatsApp, and even the penetration of email across, you would call essentially this era as a social networking era. And then this is the era of targeted attacks, is what I would love to call it. And I'll explain it a bit more from, when we get into the next thing. So now when we start looking at motives, I mean, as various things evolved, there are different motives that emerged. I mean, there are people who do it for pranks. Initially, in all probability, it was more of a one-upmanship. People wanted to do a bit of a pranks on various people and show how good they are in attacking. But it soon moved to vandalism. It moved to notoriety in certain circles like the dark web, where you actually prove that you're a great person when you can go and deface something. But then soon emerged profit, because as assets move into various networks and we start moving online, when you really having a valuable bank account, when you start moving IP, when you start moving your assets into the cloud, into the networks, that's when the profit motive started taking a big leap. Of course, I mean, sabotage for its own sake has always been a motive for various attacks. And today, sabotage for various reasons. It could be competition. It could be even. We can go to the next one. I mean, even the interstate, enemies, and all these kinds of things. These started becoming pretty common. Geeks, you have activists. Greenpeace kind of a people. I mean, there have been instances where things like that happen. People who have a social motive, but more importantly, corporate rivals, blackmailers, and now even the rogue states. I mean, we don't have to elaborate on who we're talking about here, but when states start sponsoring these kind of an attacks, then it starts taking an extremely serious turn, and there is real money and motivation behind all of these things. So it's not just you're not running into some script kiddie or some college kid who's trying to perform some of these attacks. These actually are sponsored with billions and billions of dollars behind it. The next one, Srinidhi. And similarly, as this evolved, the various entities of what is getting attacked has changed. Initially, it was, you used to lose data from your hard drives, your networks used to kind of go down. As more and more networks started connecting, there are worms that spread across your network. And of course, as you get into internet, I mean, it's now pretty much everywhere. But till this point of time, all the entities that were getting attacked, I would like to say they are physical entities, which is always the target was as either a data or a machine or a network. But that completely changed in the last few days and last few years. And now the target of attack is actually none of these things. I would think the target of attack is the human. If you start looking at social engineered attacks, now everybody who's an attacker has started realizing that the weakest point in anybody's defense is not their computers, it's not their network, but it's the individual. I mean, getting into the individual would give you more access and more vulnerabilities and more penetration into anybody's network than ever before. So today, I would say that the target of attack is the human, and that explains all the social engineered attacks. And the next one, please. So this is an analogy I'd love to throw at people sometimes, and says this is the era of digital Darwinism, where the social behavior has evolved so much more, and the consumer behavior has evolved so much more that technology is yet to adapt itself to that. The technology is still thinking in terms of entities, machines, networks, and all of that, but in quite a few places, the importance has completely shifted. The social behavior has changed. The way we use computers have changed. The way we use the online assets have changed. So this gap in adoption, I would say, is really the cause of the different kinds of attacks that we start seeing at this point of time. And that's what Srinidhi and Mahesh, as we go forward, they will start covering in terms of how do we use machine learning, how do we use intelligence, various kinds of intelligence, artificial learnabilities, and all of that in dealing with these evolutions. There are essentially 5 types of criminals that, as we look at it today, that we encounter. The social engineer, whose idea is to do that phishing, and even we still have the Nigerian mails and the Kenyan mails which come in, which promise you millions of dollars. A lot of people ask me, even I don't know who would get fooled by that. But trust me, as long as the mails are coming in, it means there are people getting fooled by that. Okay, that itself is an indication that there are people falling for it. Just read the newspapers, you would know that. Then the spear phishing, essentially the hacker who's essentially the hacker is a very interesting person, because this is a person with an intent who understands your network much better than anybody can, and then they would really launch these targeted attacks. The rogue employee, believe it or not, internal attacks, employee compromise has been much more seen nowadays than ever before. And then, of course, the ransom artists. I mean, we've seen various locking incidents where your network assets are all locked down, all your access is locked down, and this is essentially the ransom artist at play. With this, what I would like to do is, I have Srinidhi who would help you walk through the specifics in terms of what are the attacks we are seeing and where are the places with that, we are trying to evolve the protection along with the evolution to the landscape. Over to you, Srinidhi.
Sure. Thank you, Rama. Thanks for the insightful start to this webinar. I think it's really great that we could get your experience and the view of the cybersecurity, and I think the audience will greatly appreciate and probably would be able to harvest this knowledge for them. It's a good foundation for this webinar. Thank you. So going on to guys, before I would clearly, my understanding is 80% of the audience are students and 20% of them are faculty and experienced folks. So a few things before I start. will be more generic in using the terms of technologies. But in case I hit upon any terms of reference to any McAfee technologies, I will explicitly clarify so that you don't have bouncers that you will deal with, right? And the other thing that I wanted to quickly tell is security is a very large domain. We're just trying to give you a glimpse of it in 60 minutes, right? That on the enterprise endpoint side of things, and it's a combination of one-on-ones or fundamentals and fewer advanced topics. So I'm just trying to set the tone here for the presentation, right? So getting on to this, the attacks. If you just look at it, how and what. So the attack surfaces are like, for example, how can the attack happen, right? So if we just see, it can happen through either a USB data transfer, a Bluetooth data transfer, AirDrop data transfer, a network, or an internet. Typically, these days, the malware authors are so very, technically savvy, and they know which are the weak spots. They're being fileless attacks, right? Not just a portable executable file to sending on your computer. It's just in memory, right? So in that case, it becomes very, very important as to because as a security vendor, you should be looking at how do we protect our customers, right? And the entry point which is very, very important. How do we ensure that the entry point is not exploited to the extent that, okay, the guys will just say, okay, online or offline methods combinations, and based on the behavior and the vector, what they try to do is trying to take control over your systems, exploit it, or corrupt your data. That's exactly what happens. And just to get to that, if you just look at in the past, just in the recent past, almost 10, 15 years back, it used to be all floppy distributed rudimentary networks being protected, and it used to be few signatures, right? And you run that Dr. Solomon or something on a given floppy disk, right? So that used to be the case, and then that used to be maybe weekly ones or a monthly ones kind of a signature that you just go run and protect your networks, right? The boot sector. So the threats were totally different, right? And right now it's more of encrypted malwares, polymorphic, obfuscated malicious code, keyloggers, ransomwares, right, which kind of actually affect both cloud as well as your endpoints. So that's the kind of threat that we are kind of dealing with. And with malware authors becoming more and more technical savvy and want to exploit the situation, we need to be, as security vendors or security practitioners, we should be looking at how we can actually protect the endpoints or the ecosystem with the next generation technologies, which can be much more dynamic without any signature, right? So it's more of protecting a zero-day malware kind of a thing. So that's where I just wanted to set the tone on the attacks and how it can happen and how security vendors can be mentally prepared to actually counter these ill measures of the hackers, right? So going on to the next one, right? So this is something that I wanted to give you a pictorial view of why endpoint security is important, right? So yes, in today's context, I can just compare it. Okay, you have a CCTV camera, you have alarm systems, right? But still, a lock is important, right? So the analogy is this. Why is that important, right? Endpoint security has evolved from traditional antivirus to providing a comprehensive protection for sophisticated malware. And like I said, evolving zero-day threats, right, for this. And organizations of all sizes are at risk from the hackerware, organized crime, malicious, and accidental insider threats, right? And endpoint security is often seen as cybersecurity's front line. So it's important that endpoints are protected, right? And represents one of the first places organizations look to secure their enterprise networks. So that is the reason. So it's an analogy of, it's like even here we have cloud-based security, we have network-based security, right? We have endpoints. So, but endpoint is very important for all the right reasons that I mentioned, right? So that's this slide all about, right? So coming on to the next one. So this is something that I wanted to highlight, right? Just more from an education standpoint. As you know, breaches have been increasing, right? 65% of large organizations were breached in the last 12 months. That's very clear, right? Everybody, you name the company, have been breached, right? And 25% experienced repeat incidents as well, right? And if you just look at how, because these days, right from even the household, a consumerish household, a refrigerator has an IP address, right? So given the kind of connected devices, so it's a very complex system to protect, right? And enterprises are much more different in their own breed, right? And with the kind of permutations and combinations of systems, subsystems, and the interlink between those. And with that complex stuff, it takes at least 8 days for a security investigation, bare minimum, right? And organizations can be 38% to 100% more effective if security teams collaborate better. I'm coming to this, I'll park it here, but what I'm trying to say is collaboration is equally important because these days we have gone from a global threat intelligence or a cloud-based lookup to a combined joint threat intelligence, right, wherein a security vendor collaborates with the person or the corporate that he's providing a service to, right, or a solution to, because the corporate would have their own set of hashes that they would want to whitelist. They would want given an own lookup for their own reputation and applications, right? Application whitelisting, a lot of other things there. So all said and done, there's a need for us to collaborate, right? And few of the functional silos, right? If you just look at 62% of cases, attackers compromised organization within minutes, right? It's like it's just ransomware. It's not even minutes, seconds, right? So it's like on an average, like I said, it takes 10 plus weeks to identify what the issue is, what the breach has been, what the malicious attack has been, and to identify and partly recover, right? If the larger ecosystem is impacted, it takes much more time, right? And 70 to 90% of malware samples detected are unique to an organization, like Rama said. These are all targeted attacks, right? So that is where the future is going to be on the state of enterprise security, right? So I'll move on to the next slide here, right? And this is something. Top 3 customers security concerns and desired outcomes. If you just look at it, how can I better protect and detect threats faster, right? So you should be in a position to outsmart the attackers, right? You should have a comprehensive threat defense mechanism and a combat pervasive threats, right? So that is one aspect of it. And at the same time, how can I reduce the IT security complexity and minimize the operational burden? It's more about increasing the capacity, reducing the complexity via shared intelligence, like I said, between organizations which are being protected by the security vendor and the security vendor themselves, right? And an adaptive architecture and a streamlined workflow. With these two, how can I gain improved contextual visibility, right, in my environment and response? This is more of an IT administrator response. Discover and respond fast, right? Contextual defense is to quickly expose and remediate advanced threats. So that's something that we should be looking at as how complex the security ecosystem is and how we can be catering to something of this sort, right? So that's on the top 3 customer security concerns and the desired outcomes more from an enterprise security standpoint, right? So this is another evolution I wanted to quickly go over on this particular slide deck. So it used to, like I said, it used to be a signature-based approach, release once a month kind of a thing. Then we moved into an AB daily release, faster market, release to market. And we used to have host intrusion detections and stuff like that. Now, with firewalls, hits, and a web protection, like I said, web is a major source of threat, and you should know which sites are safe to browse, which sites actually push a malicious payload onto your system, right? So that's equally important. That research and analysis, right? URL-based whitelisting or blacklisting analysis, etc., etc. And now we have come to an overall state of a total security where it's a real-time dynamic environment, including data leak prevention. You would have seen, right? There have been data breaches in call centers. So many people's accounts have been compromised. The data is available on the dark web, right? So data leak is DLP is an integral part of a total endpoint security suite, and then encryption, drive encryption. That's another aspect of it. And emails, the web servers, right? And that's and network, right? That's the endpoint. Total security that I can probably say from an enterprise standpoint, and of course the future of endpoint detection and response and the XDR, extended endpoint response. So that's the view of how the evolution of endpoint security is from where it was to where it is today, right? And the security elements, like I said, I'll just quickly glance through this. It's like I said, effective malware detection. It's all about engines, signatures, and faster time to markets, right? And the second one is being basically firewall, where you have have the advanced threat protection through dynamic stateful firewall, desktop firewalls, simple workflows, simple rules. The more we make it complicated in an enterprise ecosystem, we might have the right management platforms all said and done. The trick lies in being simple here, right? Protection across different layers, protocols, right? Application fingerprinting, right? And protection across potential attack over free Wi-Fi or access points. This is really, really important. So all of these are, because if you have a laptop, you have to have an enterprise software installed. You should be in a position to have the location awareness, right? So that is where it's important that you have the right level of threat protection, firewall, intrusion prevention systems, right? And of course the web, right? So all of these are the security elements of a good endpoint, enterprise endpoint node, right? So with that, I'll just go to the next. This is more of an analogy of what we believe as protect, detect, and correct as a cycle, right? McAfee as a device to cloud security company, we have a strong portfolio of products covering complete protect, detect, correct life cycle, and an intelligent and integrated framework via a single console, right? Which is our enterprise EPO, right? Which is the manageability software. McAfee provides a sophisticated protection for today's and tomorrow's advanced and emerging threats. So I just wanted to clearly say this is our philosophy of protecting our customers, right? End to end, right? So coming on to the next one, this is the major one. I just wanted to quickly highlight on this particular security platform that we believe, this is more generic basically, but I just wanted to quickly go over what we have as a shared endpoint security platform. So like I said, we have a manageability platform which is called McAfee EPO, Policy Orchestrator, and that has its own set of client user interfaces, the reputations, the remediations, and the connection to all of the McAfee endpoint enterprise suites, or across all of enterprise suites, there is something called a data exchange layer, which interacts with which is a complete bus which interacts with each of our products, right? So that's the view of shared security endpoint platform that we have. And below that, if you just look at it, we have the threat prevention. That's where whether there's an on-access kind of a malware attack, or which is more of an on-access scan, right? So the moment you come in touch with malware, on access it's being blocked, right? And our on demand is more of a scheduled compliance scan that we want to do it. And in addition to it, the threat prevention module also talks about the smart or idle scan, right? So when the system is in idle state, how to mobilize the resources? How do we be good on performance, right? So that people don't feel that security is too much of a heavy weight on their endpoints, right? And access and endpoint protection. So that's the core of the threat prevention modules that we typically have, right? And of course, like I said, firewall is more a set of rules which is block untrusted executables, right? And have a set of rules where what to allow, what not to allow, right? So that's clear on having a fire fencing around our security ecosystem. And like I said, web control, our solutions are primarily multi browsers, and there's a complete analysis which happens on all the URLs based on categorizations, right? And it's also evident that we participate in the A/B test where we get to know where do we have which URLs, malicious URLs are being blocked. Is it the right thing? So it's more of an efficacy test, right? And in addition to it, we will also look at auto install clients, smart policies, and web gateway proxies and stuff like that. That's more of a securing the web, securing our endpoints from the web, right? From the threats on the web. So in addition to it, we have this adaptive protection, which is all about dynamic application containment. So that is called DAC. I'll talk about it in much more detail in the next few slides. And we have Real Protect, which is a real dynamic solution, which can again be categorized as EDR, Endpoint Detection and Response, which will give a zero-day protection from real-time threats. It has its own set of deep learning and machine learning algorithms, right? And that will ensure that even in the dynamic environment where things are unknown, you will end up protecting the node, right? So, and like I said, adaptive protection is also about reputation sharing. We will have to work with a larger ecosystem, be it security vendor or be it in terms of the competitors that we or the organizations that we protect. So the reputations will be a combined joint effort. That's where we have something called a joint threat intelligence as well, right? And we do advanced malware analysis for adaptive protection, right? And EDR, I think Mahesh will cover much more details of what EDR is in next few slides after I conclude. So that's on the McAfee Endpoint Security Platform. I'll go on to, this is more of an education exercise for the folks on the call because I hear that 80% of this participants are students. So this is not well deep into it, but this is more of, okay, what kind of metadata around a given a thread or a file or a parent process or a shared name or whether a file is signed or not signed, what kind of metadata, what kind of a McAfee component do we have? For example, McAfee on-access scan caters to all of these elements on the left, excluding rule ID and rule name, which are prevalent to only exploit prevention or maybe access protection and self-protection, right? As well as firewall. The rest of them, it's only rule ID and rule names are the ones which have component exposure to specific rules which can be customizable by the user. Similarly, we have on-demand scan, right, or an exploit prevention, which barring the threat type and the threat name, everything is enabled there, right? So it's more of all metadata holds good there. So it's more of a map or a ready reckoner for people to understand how the security metadata or aspects of what I say, the actors or the metadata around the threat is being positioned or acted by McAfee component. So going on to this, so the new advanced capabilities, right? So this is where I'll just go a bit deep on the dynamic application containment. So the dynamic application containment, or DAP that we can call, right? It will typically aid in zero-day malware infections to stop the zero-day malware, basically, right? So, and immediately blocks process actions that malware often uses, right? Typically, if you know, there is some malware hooks onto a process, right? So it's just like, so you could block that process, right? That malware typically uses, right? And that lets the suspicious file, for example, you get a file, right? And it lets the suspicious file load into memory without allowing it to make changes to the endpoint. So if there is a change to the endpoint, you are compromised, right? So, and in the process, it's such as changing the registry or deleting a file or infecting other subsystems while under suspicion, right? So the endpoint and user can remain fully productive while providing an opportunity for much more in-depth analysis. So this will have a zero impact, but in the process, we can see that is providing a 34% higher detection rate. That is dynamic application containment for you. And like I said, Real Protect, it's again a dynamic technology which will which peels away the latest obfuscation techniques to unmask hidden threats. So again, that will also aid in the zero-day malware phishing out, so that there's no place for a zero-day malware to hide on the endpoints. It applies state-of-the-art machine learning, like I said, to perform both pre-execution static analysis as well as post-execution behavioral analysis, right? So all of this without a signature, right? Like I said, the traditional methods were signature-based. This is purely machine learning-based behavioral analysis, deep learning algorithms being used, and it stops more malware than any signature-based static-only solution, blocking most malware at the endpoint before it ever has a chance to execute. So Real Protect is giving us 100% real-world efficacy, right? So that is on the advanced capabilities of this. Now I'll just quickly go over a demo-ish animation view. So it's an intelligent So it's a view of how the dynamic endpoint threat defense system works, right? So if you just look at an internet, right, and basically a threat being blocked at a gateway level, right, and that's straightforward. As a result, so the gateway blocks 95% of the zero-day malware more than any other vendor, right? That's our product line. I'm talking about the McAfee web gateway, right? And then if it's unknown at McAfee web gateway level, it will go to the TIE server, which is Threat Intelligence Exchange, and it just and it goes to the McAfee Global Threat Intelligence and tries to get the reputation from there, and then gives it back to the gateway, right? That is one way of looking at it. And at the same time, if it's still unknown, then it just goes to ATD, which is sandboxing, right? McAfee and advanced threat defense. That's Mahesh will be talking more about that. And then it also goes to the endpoint side of things. And the TIE server, and if you just see at the end of the day, EPO is our management platform. All the information, the moment we have that reputation, it's being shared across EDR, EPO, which is a centralized management console. Our endpoint security suite has it. So it's actually covered end to end, right? And active response, EDR takes it, and it just goes to sends that information back to endpoint here, right? So that way you can just see if the gateway receives the ransomware samples or tears it apart to determine its reputation, right? And advanced threat defense combines the in-depth static core and dynamic analysis, which is malware sandboxing, and provides increased zero-day threat protection against advanced attacks. So that's all McAfee technologies that work for you, and this will actually it will clear off. It's a lot of headache taken away from the security operations center, right? And as you know, it's a very tricky thing. Basically, we hardly get the right kind of skills. Skills are scarce in terms of being in security domain, right? If you just look at the problem statement today, it's like lack of skills in security. No one cares until you are breached, right? And the ignorance and unawareness of how things work. So these are all the impediments to implementing a security pitch or a safe security ecosystem for an endpoint or an organization, right? So with all those things, here the dynamic endpoint threat defense demo that I just showed as a animation view just clearly says as to how we have technologies to talk to each other and ensure that we stop a breach or an infection or an attack to actually happen, right? So that is where this is all about. And the last topic of proactive endpoint security before I hand over to Mahesh, this is something nobody wants to be hit first and then do an analysis of why we got hit. At the end of the day, we should try and see how we can stop ourselves from being hit by a threat. All said and done, we have this is more of a shift left kind of a strategic view of what we are planning to do and how organizations must assess threats and risks simultaneously so that they have the proactive view to ensure that they are not attacked, right? So they have a preview of what is coming their way, right? So that's where we have a product line called Envision Insights, right? Envision Insights is more of an extension, right? Using global threat intelligence, like I said, that is more of a cloud lookup, right? To prioritize threats, predict the likelihood of future threats, and also prescribe ways to prevent threats before they occur, right? The prioritization of threats and active scanning is where, okay, people say, for example, scan for known campaigns in your environment. If you know that there is something within your environment, which is a campaign which is globally being seen. So it's more of a outside in view, right? So what is there in the field and how is that you have been impacted already, right? So that is basically by using the endpoint protection ENS suite of 10.7 telemetry, you will be able to see what kind of threats are there out there and what is something which is within your ecosystem, and display the list of active campaigns, show how the environment compares to other sectors. For example, if you are into an IT sector, how is another IT sector organization or is in terms of security compliance, right? So you'll be able to compare and also do a predictive assessment of security posture. For example, show details of campaigns and associated indicators of compromise. So indicators of compromise.
So how do we overcome or how do we catch these advanced threats? And this is where the technology of sandboxing comes into play. This actually creates a safe virtual environment where you can analyze the behavior of a suspected file. The executable is actually let to execute in this specific virtual environment, and then the behavior is observed if it is a malware or not. Even if it is, hello?
Yeah.
Yes, please go on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even if it is a malicious activity, there is no danger to the organization because the executable cannot reach outside the sandbox, and the sandbox can be completely destroyed. Next slide, please. As we saw earlier, sandboxing can detect known and unknown malware. But there is also a disadvantage with Sandbox. It takes quite a lot of time, and at times it is expensive, right? So you may not need to have the Sandbox technology when you have other processes that can handle the work. It is probably better for engines that can identify the signature to catch the known malware and make use of the funnel analysis to analyze the more complex malware. In some cases, the malware has sandbox evasion techniques wherein it can have a delayed execution path. In such scenarios, you could have the full static code analysis to determine whether a file is malicious or not. The combination of dynamic and static code analysis broadens the sandboxing protection capabilities against the evasive or advanced threats. Next slide. So this is just a flow that I have highlighted about how the malwares can be detected, in a sandbox. As I have mentioned earlier, you could have a virtual environment that is created. This virtual environment is more restricted in nature. You could execute the file. You can monitor or you can understand what is the behavior that is occurring. And then you can analyze the changes made to the system and then determine if that file is a malware or not. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, sandboxing is a combination of dynamic and static code analysis. As part of the dynamic analysis, you see the runtime behavior on the system. The malware could be making registry modifications. It could be making network communications or network connections. There could be certain other processes that can come into life, right? So a dynamic analysis will be observing for all these changes in the sandbox environment. What is static code analysis? So this actually does not check for the executable binaries in a runtime environment. Instead, it obfuscates and it checks for the analysis of the code itself. So as part of static code analysis, you could have the family classification coverage. You could also determine the code that is executed. So imagine if there is a malware that is going to execute after a delayed start time. That cannot be known as part of dynamic analysis. Instead, it could be caught by static analysis. So it is a combination of dynamic and static analysis that is used for sandboxing technology. Next slide. Yeah, these are just some of the examples that we have listed here, wherein as part of the sandbox technology, we can identify the malware that are present across all these different file types. Next slide. Okay, as part of the next slide, I'll be talking about EDR. Let me first explain the problem. As we all know, and as probably Srinidhi mentioned, endpoints offer a lot of rich data, and the data collection agents is responsible for sending all these activities to a central server. Imagine you have the central server receiving close to about 30,000 events per day per endpoint. And if your organization has about 10,000 systems, that is close to 300 million traces per day. The problem is, how do we interpret all this data and how to interpret the alerts? And more importantly, how to present the findings that can actually indicate a threat. So this is the big challenge that EDR solves. EDR is called as Endpoint Threat Detection and Response. In short, it is called as EDR. Next slide. This is just another representation of the security operations workflow. So in one of the slides earlier, Srinidhi was mentioning that the security operation personnel will need to determine what are all the various threats that are occurring within an organization. And as part of the workflow, you could have the first step, let us say from SIM, which is an event management tool that can be correlating quite a lot of the rules and sending the events to your monitor. At this stage, we will have to start the triage process. And what you need is quite a lot of additional data. And in order to gather this additional data, you'll have to query, you'll have to interpret, and this is a repetitive process which becomes highly inefficient. As a result, what happens is organizations tend to deal with just a system or a two. They may try to wipe out or quarantine the system and move on. This leaves most of their other systems still vulnerable to the attacks. Due to this factor, in the real world today, the number of events that can be analyzed per person is exceptionally low. So can you go on to the next slide, please? So this is where EDR, which are actually a set of tools combined together, solves the specific solution. The first is for detecting and investigating the suspicious activities. You would have the endpoint visibility and data collection. The next is for you to determine the automated and real-time analytics. You would have a correlation engine that would be there. So a combination of the data from the endpoint with the automated analysis and the heuristics related to the mapping of all these alerts gives you the envisioned EDR ecosystem. Please note, EDR is still a nascent domain, and the technology is evolving to XDR as well as MDR. XDR stands for Extended Detect and Response. MDR stands for Managed Detect and Response. Next slide, please. So as you see here, this is just a workflow in terms how the system interactions take place. This is just a different representation of the slide that you saw earlier. So EDR ingests quite a lot of the alerts. It can be from the SIM, it can be from emails and other stuff. And as part of the second step, EDR determines what are the investigation guides or playbooks that needs to be used. So the playbook is basically a set of question and answers that the security personnel will go through that will help them to narrow down the root cause analysis. As part of the third step, the EDR queries are fed to the external data sources, wherein if they need to collect more data from the endpoint or from your other data points, as Srinidhi was mentioning, it could be your GTI, JTI, all these places, the correlation happens. The data is collected and the correlation happens. And then finally, an activity feed enables the synchronization of the case management with the ticket services. Next slide. So in short, the EDR, I'm just trying to highlight the advantages here. So the detect and acting on the advanced threats is much faster making use of an EDR tool. You can actually do a lot more with your existing SOC personnel. There is a term that we use called as HMT. It is human machine teaming. Okay, I will repeat, HMT is not Hindustan machine tool. It is human machine teaming. And the combination of the human and machines can actually multiply the investigative efforts, and it can explore more hypotheses in terms of parallel speed and accuracy. Okay, and lastly, with the advantages as part of the EDR, it is a SaaS-based solution, and we can offer quite a lot of these containment, much faster. Next slide, please. Okay, we'll move on to compliance and certifications. Next slide. So I just want to highlight here why are certifications needed and why is compliance important. As we all know, a certification simply means it assures somebody with a qualification to perform a job or a task. It can be an action, it can be a process, or it can be an official document, that is attesting a level of achievement, right? So certifications can be of 3 different types. It can be a professional. So for example, if you're in the field of medical sciences, you can get a professional license. A certification can be product specific, or it can be for a corporate itself. So for example, a company that is dealing with financial details, right? It can be your credit card information. It could be your banking information. It is important for such organization to have PCI certifications, or their systems need to be PCI compliant. If you have organizations like hospitals and healthcare industries, you may want to have your systems HIPAA compliant, right? So HIPAA is for medical, PCI, which stands for payment card industry, is for organizations that are dealing with financial data. Next slide. Okay, so Srinidhi, can you just play the slide?
Yeah, I'm playing it.
Thank you. So if you saw here, this is a pit stop, right? And pit stop is a special place wherein a race car pulls in to either get more fuel or to make repairs and other stuff. And the car was there just for about 4 seconds. And any delay, even it can be as a matter of a second or two, they can actually lose the opportunity to win the race. As you know, a race car can travel at 100 miles per hour, and every second matters for them. You may want to know why I brought this pit stop analogy. So Srinidhi, can you go to the next slide, please? So compliance is more like a pit stop, right? You want to ensure your data security journey is flawless, it is seamless, and you don't want to have any kind of interruption when you start this compliance journey. As part of the regulatory compliance, if companies are not adhering to the compliance, it can actually lead to big security potholes. And another thing that we will have to keep in mind is companies can actually incur quite a lot of penalty if they are not compliant to certain standards. Next slide. So what I'm trying to highlight here is the compliance is more like a continuous monitoring, and you need this continuous monitoring to achieve your systems to be in compliance. You can call it as a process and technology that is used to detect and probably maintain compliance on an ongoing basis. Since you are constantly assessing, it leads to increased security across your IT as well as the business environments. It can also help you to address the risks associated with an organization, financial and or operational environment. One of the important points that organizations need to demonstrate is they're not only profitable, but they also have to be ethical in compliance with quite a lot of the regulations. And these are needed to address the sustainability of the organization itself. Next slide. As you are all aware, there are two things that are critical for compliance. One is timeliness and the other is accuracy. With a number of these regulations that are continually coming into play, many organizations may find themselves in a firefighting mode as they try to stay compliant and avoid penalties. At times, it can actually lead to a negative impact and a brand damage as well. In most cases, organizations actually have quite a lot of the manual process. This is not only time consuming, and as part of the manual process, you will not be able to repeat it on an ongoing basis. Some of the complex collections of the point products actually makes it challenging, and this is where companies tend to leave out the compliance of those specific systems. When you add all these factors with a lack of automated audit methodology, it can lead to loss of revenue. It can lead to an increased cost because of having more auditors, having more manual processes and other stuff. And finally, if your systems are not in compliance, it can actually lead to an increased risk exposure. Next slide. So this is where the advantages of automated solutions come into play. So if your organization is taking care of the audits, we have a product called McAfee Policy Auditor combined with McAfee EPO. We can actually have many of these compliance checks as part of an automated process. Since this is automation in place, the process can be repeated on an ongoing basis. And this actually leads to having fewer administrators or fewer manual personnel to take care of your systems. And finally, since all these things are automated, you can actually spend less time on generating the reports itself. At a high level, just reducing about 10 plus administrators can lead to a saving of about $1.2 million, right? So an automated solution is extremely important to achieve compliance and also achieve your certifications. So this is the end of the compliance, and we have the next slide, which is related to the best practices. Srinidhi, would you be covering this?
Sure, will do, Mahesh. Thank you so much. This was very insightful. So just to ramp it up, I think, sorry, we are almost 9 minutes on top of the hour. So it's just that because of the technical glitch that we had in between. So just to wrap it up, just sort of quickly going over few compliance or best practices of how we can be compliant as an organization, right? And you can derive what you as an end user can need to do as well in the process. For example, identification of user workstations, tagging the users, define the security policies within an organization and specific to the user groups, document the security postures and policies, which is a derivative of the previous point that I talked about. In addition to it, have anti-malware, host intrusion prevention, and behavioral protection on all the machines, right? So that's just to ensure that you are protected. A full scan once a week is minimum, as a bare minimum is what we advise, so that it's not just on access, but as and when more as a compliance, because most of the large organizations, they do it. A full scan once a week is a must, right? And device control policies, block access to any executables and scripts from removable devices, more from these USBs or HDR hard drives, external hard drives or SD cards and stuff like that. So because these are the, like I said, initially these are the attack surfaces, right? And disable Bluetooth, that's another area, and IR ports to prevent any communication that are not controlled by corporate policies, right? So those are the gray areas. So we just need to ensure that the Bluetooth and are kind of disabled and our IR ports are actually prevented from any communication. In addition to it, application control policies, we should be preventing applications from copying executables or scripts to network shares. We should enforce a rule that only allow specific applications to save files on a remote server, or restrict usage of illegitimate applications in the environment. So these are the things. It's more of a application control policies bucket that probably these preventive measures come into. And in addition to it, location awareness. I touched upon it very recently at just on scratch of the surface. Define the level of security policies used based on the type of connection. For example, if you are in a Starbucks, right, it's a private connection that you're exposed to. So the location awareness is something that needs to have being set up on your machine so that you're not compromised on. As long as you're on using a corporate laptop, try and use a VPN connection. If you're actually based on an external network, connected through an external connection. So in addition to it, email gateways and URL filtering policies, these are more from an administrative standpoint for a corporate IT administrator. And like what Mahesh said, sandboxing or browser isolation, and these are the things that within the organization you need to have this kind of a setup, so that we are, because sandboxing, like Mahesh said, it's not that cheap, right? So it's a costly affair. So we just need to have the security postures and like I said, more of a funneled approach, right, of how we want to secure our networks, our own endpoints, and be a secure enterprise endpoint ecosystem. Okay, so that's pretty much on my side. And for question and answers and assessment, it's over to the SciSec team.
Thank you so much. I'm sure the participants would have found this session very insightful, as I did. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, McAfee team. So we have a long list of questions, and some of them we have also shared with you on the WhatsApp for your convenience. So, and looking at the paucity of time, I think you can pick and choose the questions that you feel are relevant and would like to answer.
Sure. Let me start off with a few, Mashika. So I think somebody had asked what's the full form of EPO. EPO stands for e-policy orchestrator. This is the command and control application for many of the security administrators. On top of EPO, you have many of the endpoint products that Srinidhi was talking about, or even some of the next generation products that can be used as a plug and play.
Yeah. And there was a question around with respect to research for endpoint security, is there any gap? So like I said, right, it's a collaborative effort. It happens on real time, right? So there's no gap per se. If you I think just last week, the research team actually had a webinar. So, it's for folks to say for example, if you're a consumer and you want to get an endpoint security product, what kind of research will you do? That is one aspect of what will you look for in a security vendor. That's one aspect of it. Within a security ecosystem, what kind of research is being done in a dynamic mode to ensure that we protect the customers there. So that in that particular cycle, there is absolutely no gap because it's a seamless experience, because it's an operations process. Like I said, security is a tactical stuff. It's not, you need to be in it day in, day out, right? So it's a noble cause. So in any of our security ecosystems, we will ensure that there's no gap there. Even if there is a customer who wants a specific hash to be a whitelisted or blacklisted, the end-to-end process is just seamless because we have quite a few anti-malware tools to interact and ensure that we do the right things right? So,
okay.
So, yeah. Mahesh, will you take the next one? How can we identify if advanced malware, if it affects?
Yeah. So as I was mentioning, the advanced malware can be detected within the sandbox environment. It is a combination of dynamic as well as the static analysis. However, if there is an advanced malware that can obfuscate itself, wherein it does not show its behavior in that specific times spent for analysis, or even as part of the static code analysis, if it is obfuscated in such a way that we'll not be able to detect, the malware still goes undetected, right? So that's how today you find some of these malwares that stay resident within an organization for many, many years. And it's at one point in time that can be triggered by the hacker, right? So it is at that time we find out the behavior that is occurring within the environment, and then we have to work on providing the signatures or the solution. But to a large extent, the sandboxing technologies can find the advanced malware.
Okay. There's one question which is basically, what is the role of SOC in protecting IT security? I think you covered it, right, Mahesh? But I'll just touch upon it. Yeah, and in addition to it, can we integrate it with cloud platforms like Azure? See, most of our platforms, I think we have Envision Cloud, right? Most of our products are actually integratable with cloud services, and we have it's a combination of a private cloud to public cloud or a hybrid model, right? So our security solutions, we were not able to touch upon all the products here because of the lack of time. But the pitch was not product based, so you need to excuse us on that. But to answer it in short, all of our products are cloud integratable, which is private, public, as well as hybrid. So that's on that. Can end user create sandbox to know the effect of malware? This is covered already by Mahesh. How to prevent the DDoS? This is how firewall and total internet security applications. Does both need to be active to secure an end system? Like I said, right, it's a combination. Firewall and the host intrusion prevention, these are all different layers of security, right? So you need to be looking at how do we ensure that, for example, if without these multiple layers, the final layer catching everything is not something that you can expect, right? You can't say, I've not put anything in endpoint, it'll all be in a hypervisor layer, it'll all be in the cloud-based setup without a client. That's not practically possible, right? So similarly, we should be looking at a layered approach for security, and it should be stitched or woven closely so that nothing can fall between the cracks there. So that should be the strategy around the elements of what you choose to protect on an endpoint is all about. So that's a short answer to it's a much more insightful question, but it requires a much lengthier answer because it depends on your ecosystem, right? And the number of nodes and what kind of threat perceptions are there for your setup. So some malware kind of software cannot be used to prevent.
So somebody had asked, how do you detect if a WannaCry ransomware is present, right? So as we all know, WannaCry actually infected quite a lot of systems across many organizations. And there are some ways that it can be detected. What we did as part of the advanced threat detection was we were observing the file behavior in terms of how many files are being created, right? So in your sandbox environment, when you explode this binary, and when the WannaCry ransomware comes into play, it can start creating numerous files. It could have quite a lot of activity to your TCP port, right? And if actually your firewall is not there in place, you could actually have quite a lot of connection to the internet. The other way to detect, apart from, let us say, the sandboxing technology, is also to observe the network traffic. As I mentioned, if one of the TCP port is open and there is quite a lot of activity taking place for that specific port, you could have network detection come into the play and those respective products trying to identify the presence of ransomware.
Okay, so I'll take the next one. I think there was a question around how do we how zero-day attack is addressed, right? So it's not like what you mentioned there, that you just need to send this information for McAfee to respond back for a given signature. That is not how it is. It's much more dynamic, like I clearly said when I talked about the next generation, the new advanced defense capabilities, which is dynamic application control as well as Real Protect. So just to give you a high level of how Real Protect works without disclosing the IP or any other internals of Real Protect. So for example, if a file is being moved, copied, right, or a registry entry being made, or altering a registry entry or a mutex, right? Anything which is an unusual activity, we actually come up with a dynamic model, right? So if these aspects are done, then something is, and first of all, the first entry criteria or the thing that we look at is what is the reputation of that hash, right? If that hash is known, right? Is it known clean, right? Or is it dirty? If it's dirty, it would not have even come into Real Protect or DAX, right? So if it's not known, that is when we look at these attributes. What is it trying to do? Is it trying to inject into another process, or is it trying to modify a mutex or a registry entry, right? Or is it trying to copy something? So if a combination of these, we will have our set of rules, we will have our set of intelligence built, and we have our deep learning algorithms also, which can give you an instant zero-day protection. If a combination of some such things happen, then you say block it right away, even though you need not have to wait for a signature to come from McAfee, right? Once we see similar trends, the next that will all by default have it. So that's just for your information. That's how we actually work on the zero-day protection.
Okay,
right?
I can take the next one here, Srinidhi. There was one that they asked, can we integrate with a cloud platform like Azure, AWS, etc. on the cloud?
I partly covered it, Mahesh. Maybe you can give more insights on that.
Yeah. So as Srinidhi has mentioned, we definitely have products to support the cloud-based technology. And we also have, for example, Envision EDR is present on AWS. We also have, as part of the Envision Cloud, supporting many of these other cloud platforms as well. The other question probably that I'll take, and the next one you can handle, is malware kind of software, can it be used to prevent data leakages? So there are different kinds of malware. In some cases, the malwares come into existence to just cause quite a lot of your DDoS attacks on your networks. And in some cases, they can stealthily put your systems or block your systems, right? So as I mentioned, Stuxnet was one of the examples where the advanced malware actually brought down the Iran nuclear program. Depending upon what the malware is intended to do, it can also send data from the organization to the hackers' systems.
Okay, fair enough. I think I'll just take this. I don't know whether this was answered or not. What is the role of SOC in protecting IT security? I think Mahesh also reiterated this. I also said that in the process of the presentation. So SOC typically decides, SOC organization reports into the Chief Information Officer or the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, right? So their posture is to protect the entire ecosystem of your organization, right? So whether it's, if you have a new application which you need to install on your computer, and if it's a rightful application, they will go over it, they will test it. Anything which comes from outside, anything which is third party, it doesn't go without the purview or a audit of SOC professionals, right? Which kind of ports are vulnerable? They do a vulnerability assessment, ensuring that it's all up to date. Because like Mahesh said, right? There is compliance, right? That SOX and the kind of certifications that are there. So to actually protect that, your environment, the network, the ecosystem should be foolproof, right? So it's an end-to-end solution for somebody. It's a good career progression for somebody who would be interested in typically understanding how to secure a corporate network. So it's an end-to-end role, and it's of course a very tough and demanding, much more tactical. Like I said, it's a tactical. Security is not something that scratch up the surface. You need to get your hands dirty, and you just need to breathe in and breathe out of security problems day in, day out. So without which you will not be able to secure your networks or your enterprise assets, right? So that is, I think we almost covered everything. Maybe we have time for another question.
Have you covered the firewall and the total internet security application?
Which question was that?
Okay.
Yeah.
So somebody had asked, with a combination of firewall and total internet security solution, does both need to be active to secure an end system? Actually, to provide security to an organization, you need various technologies and various tools. So, for example, as part of this presentation, Srinidhi covered some aspects of Endpoint. I covered the next generation security products. Similarly, you have a network-based security products as well. So all these things encompass the security solution. Now, imagine if your organization is in the cloud, your data exists in the cloud, you also need a cloud-based solution. So it is not one security product that provides you or secures you. It is a combination of the security suites that provides the holistic security to an organization.
Yeah. Okay. I think we just covered it all. Anything else? Maybe the last question that we have. I don't think so. It's around 6:28. 2 more minutes to go.
I think we can take one more lucky question, and then we can wrap it up.
Okay. Can we integrate? This is there. So okay, there's one question. Self-healing, self-advocating, and self-preventive technology exists in real time or not, sir? If exists, can you suggest the tools? See, just to give you an example, right? So, as a security vendor, our installers and our registry hives, right, and our processes, they're all designed for self-protection, right? So, in general sense, if you just say in case our product is hit for some reason, right? We can self-heal and we can recover from that, right? For example, we have a competitive install. For example, if a Trend Micro product exists and we are trying to install, then the other one or the other way around, we'll ensure that there's another competitor which is installing. Maybe we'll be writing it to the same memory space. So we will try and avoid some of those interoperable related situations, right? But in reality, if you just look at it, most of the security products will be looking at their self-healing and self-preventive technologies that are algorithms that we ensure that we use in the security ecosystem. That's pretty fundamental to our existence, right? So, and I can't just generally, because when you say suggest tools, we use it as a proprietary technology within our products. I'm not aware of any open source tool for a given function explicitly. So that's a much broader solution or a question. But to answer it in short, as security vendors, we are self-protecting ourselves and we can heal or self-recover from any adversaries which happens to our processes or our hives, registry hives, or any such assets of ours, right? So that probably covers your question.
Yeah, all right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Srinidhi, Mahesh, Sunil, and the entire McAfee team. I think for taking time out, for sharing your knowledge and patiently addressing all the queries. I apologize to participants whose questions couldn't be picked up due to paucity of time. Thank McAfee team once again. We would now move to the assessment part. I would be sharing the link and it will be open for 60 minutes. The speakers may choose to drop out now, and we